This is Dan of Vagabond Awake.
𝗕𝗕𝗢 from 𝗕𝗵𝗲 Venture.
And today we're going to talk about the 5 tricky truths about popular expat retirement locations.
And today our location is in this beautiful Boracay.
Yeah, we're filming today from Boracay, and as you can see the beaches behind us. So the 5 areas we're going to cover are cost of living, the social aspects of popular expat locations, soft landing aspect, home country problems that occur in populated expat locations, or popular, and then healthcare and health insurance, and how a populated expat area affects those conditions. Okay, let's start with social aspects. If you're single and you've moved to a place that has a lot of expats, let's use a place like 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗢𝗢 in the Philippines as an example, right? Okay. The dating culture will be different in a city like that versus the provinces. There'll be people that actually move to 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗢𝗢 to meet a foreigner, and that will be a different dynamic. And there's a lot of conversation between the expats about the Filipinos, and a lot of conversation between the Philippines about the expats, so they're kind of training each other. So you have this unusual culture that happens when there's a lot of expats dating a lot of locals.
I remember, you know what, like about 3-4 years ago that we are in the 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗢𝗢, and then we went to a fast food restaurant. Yeah. And we sit down, and there's one bunch of expats. They are talking. Yeah. And I overhear it. Actually, not overhear because they speak very loud, so I can hear all the. They were very loud. Yeah. I can hear all the conversation.
They were across the room from us, in fact.
and then they say that, oh, you know, it's hard to date a young, beautiful girl right now because there's so many expats in 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗢𝗢. Yeah. I was laughing over there. Like,
yeah, they had moved there like 10 and 15 years before, and the conditions were different when there was only so many expats. But this is even 3-4 years ago. Now they're talking about how there's too many expats. It's harder to date. So that's a great example. Another example is sort of the transactional behavior. Mm-hmm. If you're in a highly populated expat area, like in the marketplaces adapt. And so there's often like people often complain about paying higher prices than the locals do. Like if you're the only, or you're one of a few foreigners in a small town, the entire culture of having dual pricing isn't going to develop as strongly. So there's another example. So that's sort of a transactional thing that happens when you have sort of a majority and a minority that have come in from another country, and there starts to be benefits if you're a local to start seeing them differently, charging them more when they don't know what the prices should be, that kind of thing. Those are just examples of 2 things that are social aspects. The counter situation for transactional behavior like that is that once you're in a town and you get to know what the prices should be, then it's mainly the newer expats that are affected by any kind of transactional difference, because you know what you're supposed to pay, and you'll just go through the market until you're being offered the same product at the price you know the locals are paying. So that's not 100% true, that part of it.
Also, that you can, when you go to grocery store, every grocery thing, like example, a vegetable, a carrot, they will put the price, how much per kg for the carrot, and then how much is total of this carrot. So you can know about the pricings of per kg. When you go to the public market, you can ask them how much per kg for a carrot. So you will know the difference. Example, if grocery is writing 150 peso for 1 kg, in the public market it will be down like 100 peso. So you will know about the pricing as well. Right. Yes.
Okay, the other aspect of having a minority of foreigners that are in your town, but are a good number of them. If you would like to learn how I fired my boss and traveled the world for 16 years and how I pay for things, grab a free copy of my ebook. There develops this sort of group opinion. The expats that are in the town will sort of have these opinions about the locals, and the locals will have an opinion about the expats, and the communication between the two groups, they'll start to think the same, the majority group and the minority group, and which can be a problem, because if you have a few bad apples in your expat group, then they'll start to see everybody in that group as having those qualities, whatever the negative quality is that are perceived, and so that can be, over time, that can be a problem in these highly saturated expat areas if you start to be seen as a member of a group that's somehow a trouble. But that doesn't happen if you're in a low percentage expat city, or maybe one of only a handful that are there, because there aren't enough of you really to have a big opinion about this minority group. So that's one of the benefits of being a low density expat city. Another thing I call integration into the culture is where you move to a new country and you are learning about that culture and what the customs are and foods and all this sort of thing. And if you're in a high density expat community, then there's more restaurants that have your home food, there's more bars that are catering to expats, so you integrate more slowly, if you will, if at all. But in a place that's a lower concentration of expats, the expats that are there eating at the restaurants where the locals are, and they're learning more about the culture, and so there's a cultural aspect to integration in a high density expat area that slows it down a little bit, I've noticed. So. Okay, one of the positive aspects of a high density expat location, if you move to it, is what I call a soft landing. And that's where things are so developed to meet the needs of someone like you, because they're able to have restaurants and bars and shopping that meets your needs. There's not much adaptation you need to make to get to when you leave your home country. And so I call that a soft landing. It can be easier to move to a country or to a city within a country, more specifically, that has more developed resources and a lot of expats there that will share with you like where to get your car fixed, what doctor is good, and all this kind of thing.
Example in will be in the big city in almost the country, like example in Bangkok,
yeah,
and Pattaya,
yeah,
it's a lot of the English speaking, and you can get all the information you need.
Yeah.
Also, like Malaysia have KL and Penang, right?
Right.
And in Philippines, example is 𝗪𝗏𝗏 and Makati.
Cebu, Makati.
Yeah, that big city is easy.
These places are easier to adapt to when you first arrive, and after a while, once you're adapted, if you may have a desire to move to a lower density expat location just because you're more comfortable now. It's easier for you to adapt, and maybe you want a change of pace.
True. And also in the big city, they also have the grocery store, they will import all the imported food,
Yeah.
like cans,
Yeah.
everything. It's easy to find in the big city.
Right, and you'll find that all over the world. The bigger cities, often, especially capitals where the embassies are and stuff.
Yeah.
That's where all the foods from around the world are going to be. There'll be restaurants and there'll be nightlife, and maybe even your kind of music, and sometimes even the bands from your country will go through these bigger cities. Yeah.
True.
And so it can be much easier to adapt in these larger cities that are more high expat density.
And also
locations.
you will meet the local, so they can speak they speak more good English, or they speak more English, so you are easy to make friends and know about the local culture.
Yeah, and so if you're new moving overseas, it can be easier for you to adapt to a country if you start somewhere like that. And then once you've picked up a little bit more of what the local culture is, and then you can move away from the busy city after a while and find a place a little hidden gem you love. So that's kind of what a soft landing would help you do.
Yes, definitely.
Next up is cost of living. The higher concentrations of expat cities and locations often have higher rents.
Yeah.
They bring in their foreign money and exchanges well, and they're able to buy a better life than they could in their home country. And so they sometimes will even step up. Some will. They'll step up to a place even nicer than in their home country because they can. And others will be trying to save money. Maybe they're on a limited budget. So it varies. But overall, you'll see the rents are sometimes, not always, a little higher in these spots. than they would be like at a same-sized city that had a low concentration of expats. So Rennes is an example of that.
Yeah.
And you also see it in those expat high concentrations. The grocery store owners will start importing specific food that foreigners want because they know that it's going to sell. They know that it'll turn over fast enough, and they'll be able to make a lot of money on it, and they mark it up a lot because they can make more profit on the foreign stuff. It's imported, first of all. They know the buyers of that food have a higher discretionary income, and so in those expat high density cities, you're going to be paying more for, in fact, you'll have availability of imported foods where you may not in a smaller town or one where there aren't enough expats to pay for those goods. Because the locals often, they didn't grow up with the same brands as you, right? They don't know what, Oscar Mayer wieners are, or, this sort of thing. They're eating whatever they're eating in their country, and they see that on the shelf. And they're as confused by it as you are when you walk through a local grocery store and you don't know what the food is you're looking at. So it's kind of true that shopping is a big deal. It's much easier in these expat locations. But once you've been out of the pocket in the provinces or smaller towns in whatever country you're in, it'll be easier for you to adapt in that way. So.
And also the restaurant, when you're in this expat place, definitely you will get your food.
Yeah.
You'll get your comfort food.
Yeah.
And they will do it slightly better, So, but if you go to the low density, low popular place of expat,
yeah.
So it's mostly a local food.
Yeah, local food, and the quality is going to vary a lot. It will have to depend on who's making the food. Like even if they have your quote spaghetti or pizza or whatever you're used to from home, the quality will vary greatly depending on how many expats are there and how many choices there are. So the higher the density, the better chance you can get a good meal from your home country in these high density expat locations. So that's a pro of it. But a con of it is that all of those restaurants are 3 to 4 times as much as local food. But they're all, even in these high density expat locations, you're going to find foods that the locals can, they have to eat too. And sometimes their salaries are higher because the expats have forced labor up also. But sometimes they're not, and they're trying to live on the same money they were living if they were in another town. And so there'll be restaurants around catering to them, and you can get to know what the local food is, even in some of these high density expat locations. So if you decide to move away from one, you'll know what to eat and that kind of thing. So, yeah. Cost of living, nightlife can vary drastically. Like for example, in Thailand, you have cities like Pattaya, Jomtien, and Bangkok, where they have a nightlife that's like ladies' bars and they have strippers and all this kind of thing, and that can be quite more expensive than out in the province where they're just maybe they have some karaoke and just locals kind of hanging out drinking in a park kind of thing.
Also, it's like in Vietnam, it's Hoi An.
Yeah.
That part of the tourist place,
yeah.
have nightlife.
Yeah.
It was slightly expensive.
Yeah, they'll have alcohol from around the world. It'll be more expensive. They won't be drinking the local beer or whiskey or whatever they make locally. And so everything will be more. The food will be more. And then they'll be playing, if you will, more Western music, although that's pretty much true all over the world now. You're going to hear Western or K-pop, other international music, let's call it that. Mm-hmm. Not, hip-hop and techno and house and all this kind of thing has kind of gone worldwide. So you're going to hear a lot of that, and that's more dependent on age of who's attending that bar or nightlife. If they're younger people, they're listening to more modern music. If they're older, they're maybe karaokeing more, or they're listening to older music. So, but the nightlife can be pretty expensive in these high-density expat locations because if you're only going out one night a week, you don't mind paying a little more for a beer or whatever, and that's great. But again, it's an expense problem.
I will say that they also have dive bar,
Yeah, they do.
You just need to be smart to find some dive bar.
Yes.
With a cheap beer, cold beer,
Yeah.
enjoy your evening.
Yes, they do. And dive bars can be some of the best. But I'm talking about local dive bars.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. It's local dive bar, not international dive bar.
Yeah, they have expat dive bars in a lot of these places too, high expat places. Because local expats love dive bars, but also local, which are kind of fun. If you've never been to one, try to find a local dive bar.
Yeah, example also in Peru, I think we are in Lima. We went out for the bar hopping.
Yeah.
Bar hopping.
What's that area called? Barranco?
I can't remember. I think it's.
Yeah. Okay.
I remember we are in the capital city of Lima.
Yeah. Right.
It's fun.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah. And you get to see what's going on around the world if you hang out more with locals, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Thailand, Pattaya, is a place where the entire culture has formed around a high density of expats that have moved to Thailand. And so you have just like blocks and blocks of lady bars, and the nightlife is crazy there, and that's adapted to Western culture over 30, 40, 50 years, all the way back to World War II. But if you go to if you go to a smaller village somewhere in Thailand, you won't see anything like that. It's really it really affects how the culture is, how people interact, and what kind of life you can live by deciding whether you want to be in a high density expat area or more of a localized environment. Another thing you'll notice about the high concentration expat locations is there's what I call home country problems. As that minority of expats from whatever country, US, Canada, Germany, as they increase in size, there can be some problems. Whatever that culture has at home, it's going to bring with it. So like some cities where you see a lot of expats, you'll see them fighting. They'll start fighting in the bars, which will upset the police and the locals and everything. It's not as fighting is not as common around the world. It is in places like the U.S., Brazil. There can be a fight anywhere in the world, but it's just more common in some places like the U.S. or Brazil. And so, if there's a high concentration of Americans and they're get a few drinks in them, or they'll often end up in a fight or whatever. And so these high concentration areas will have some of the problems from your home country. There'll also be some infighting online, like you'll see it in Facebook groups. And
that's right.
Like on YouTube channels, they start talking trash about each other in these high concentration cities, and there's some drama and this kind of thing. And so you start to wonder, did I leave my home country to get away from some of that, and now I find it where I showed up? And so you may want to, that might be one of the reasons you would start moving away from one of these high concentration cities and try to get to know locals more and live more of a simple life, a less drama life. And so that's something that you will see in these kinds of countries. Also, as some of these problems occur, sometimes it begins to change the local culture in those sorts of cities, because not only are you adapting to that culture, but that culture is adapting to you. And so if you're importing some problems or bad behavior, you'll start to see it happen in the local culture, and then you'll start to miss some of the things you enjoyed about them when they were, more, if you like, how they were localized before a lot of expats showed up into that city. So that's another thing. Home country problems will show up. Another thing that we've noticed is, for example, healthcare and health insurance. We've noticed that in a lot of the expat high concentration cities around the world, you'll notice that the healthcare begins to start to inflate, and some of the hospitals will begin to adapt. Often they'll start calling themselves private hospitals, and the rates will start to go up. And so there'll be like one class of hospitals for the locals and the rich locals, the locals, and then there'll be another class of hospital for the rich locals and the expats that can afford it. Not all expats are rich. And so you'll start to notice that healthcare starts to escalate, and not always to the whole country. Sometimes it's more localized in these areas that are more international, if you will, like to call it that. And then you'll see there's be two different kinds of insurance for that reason. Like if you want to go to these hospitals, you got to pay this higher insurance because they're better hospitals and that sort of thing. So it affects both the healthcare and the insurance and what hospitals doctors are willing to work in. And as the concentration of the international community in some of these cities, some of these problems get exacerbated and they become more and more difficult over time. And so that can be another problem, that if you move away from those international cultures a little bit, it's a little easier. For example, we were just in a city called Iloilo, which doesn't have a lot of expats, and they had some pretty good quality healthcare there, and the prices didn't seem to be as affected as other parts, like say in Cebu City or 𝗕𝗢𝗍𝗍 or Makati, this kind of thing. And so it does make a difference. That's a bigger city that is has more of a local feel to it, and they're going to be a little more resistant to paying those prices because they know what prices should be. Now, inflation happens no matter what all over the world, so I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about up and above inflation based on a high density expat population. So
yeah,
that's
a good advice and good this information.
So think about that. So those are some of the tricky truths about retiring in a paradise location where there's a lot of expats. So you should be aware of that and be willing to, if you don't like it, shift, move. That's one of the beauties. That's one of the reasons I say, the first year or two when you move somewhere, you want to give yourself some flexibility. You don't want to buy a house right away or put down deep roots. And sometimes you even want to change countries. And so that's why, like, I have a report. It's called "Why Not to Buy Real Estate." In the first few years or something like that. And so I'll put a link to that, and you can watch it. That gives you some of the reasons why you don't want to put down roots too deep.
True. So thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe, and ring the bell.
Yeah, ring the bell. Some people have been saying, hey, we don't get your videos anymore. You have to hit the bell. You're not going to, the videos won't show up on the right side when you're on YouTube. So